Welcome to the Long COVID podcast with me, Jackie Baxter. I am really excited to bring you today's episode. Please do check out the links in the show notes where you can find the podcast website, social media and support group, as well as a link to buy me a coffee if you are able. You should not rely on any medical information contained in this podcast and related materials in making medical, health-related or other decisions. Please do consult a doctor or other health professional. I love to hear from you. If you've got any suggestions or feedback or just want to say hey, then please do get in touch. I really hope you enjoy this episode, so here we go. Hello and welcome to this episode of the Long COVID podcast. I am delighted to be joined today by Fiona Jones, co-chief investigator of the LISTEN study, which is funded by the NIHR. So we're going to be diving into all things around this. So welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Jackie.
So to begin with, would you mind just introducing yourself a little and what it is that you do?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me. It's really good to have this opportunity. I'm Fiona Jones and I'm Professor of Rehabilitation Research. I'm based at St George's University of London, but I'm also the founder and chief executive of Bridges Self-Management, which is a social enterprise that works with different healthcare teams and does a lot of co-design type work. My clinical background is as a physiotherapist originally, and I worked in lots of different areas of healthcare, but mainly worked with people with quite complex ongoing conditions. And I became interested, like many people, thinking about how some of the things that we'd learnt in our research and our work that we'd done could be applied to supporting people with long COVID. And that's what ultimately led to the idea of doing the LISTEN project, which I'm sure you'll want to know more about.
Yeah, amazing. But yeah, this idea of crossovers, you know, that long COVID is obviously a new thing because COVID is a new thing, but it's got an awful lot of crossovers with conditions that have existed for a long time. So this idea of being able to kind of draw on that, but also help other people, I guess, who have been suffering for so much longer.
Yeah, and I think also I just had to be thinking and trustful of the idea that how I would normally work would be using co-design principles. So I'd primarily be asking people who are living with the condition themselves how they can help to shape and inform the intervention that we ultimately test, which is what I've done in other areas in stroke and brain injury, major trauma, other areas of healthcare. So it was actually to have the confidence, I guess, myself to think, well, this is a new area for me, but can we apply what's worked in other areas and then adapt and refine it for people, you know, to hopefully be able to support people living with long COVID, which, as you know, is incredibly diverse and different for each individual.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, I'd love to talk more about that as well, but maybe to start with, could we just talk a bit about what the LISTEN study is?
Yeah. The LISTEN study was funded by NIHR and we started in 2021 in the beginning of August. But what we're thinking of this work as having two distinct phases. The first phase, which was the sort of first 8 months, was to co-design the intervention that's a one-to-one support package, if you like, for people with long COVID. It wasn't just to think about what does the intervention need to look like, but it was also the training that the clinicians needed to be able to deliver. So we've done a big piece of co-design, which has involved more than 30 people with long COVID and 10 different clinicians that work in the field, but also some of them have long COVID as well. And now what we're doing is we're testing out this intervention, which is, as I said, a one-to-one support package for people with long COVID. It's delivered remotely, up to 6 sessions, and it can be for anyone who has any type of symptoms of long COVID. And we are testing this in a clinical trial. So we're going to be recruiting just over 550 people, and they will come into the trial. And like a lot of trials, and this pains me to say it, with a lot of trials, there is a randomisation. So you will either be randomised to receiving the intervention or to carrying on a usual care pathway, which I know for people living with long COVID can look extremely different depending on where you work. And then we are testing the impact of the intervention compared to just carrying on with your usual care. And we're testing it in lots of different ways.
Yeah, of course. I mean, yeah, you've just touched on this kind of postcode lottery of long COVID support and care. And it's very different dependent on which country you're living in, but even within countries, isn't it? You know, you can go to a service that's sort of 10 miles away and receive completely different care.
Absolutely.
So yeah, that must make it quite difficult to kind of test things out when the regular pathway is so different in different places.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's, I think when we got the grant, so I co-lead the grant with my colleague, Professor Monica Busser, that's based at Cardiff University, and she comes from a rehabilitation research background as well. And we co-lead the study together. But, with all research, actually, there's a big run-up to actually them finally getting, awarded the grant. So we were working on this for at least a year, on and off, really sort of helping to shape the grant application, what it could look like. And when we started in August 2021, compared to where we are now, long COVID services look completely different, Jackie. Across England, they have literally transformed. So England is very different to Wales, where we're doing a lot of our work in Wales. Again, looks very different. Some areas got up and running very quickly. They followed the NICE guidelines. They got long COVID pathways in place very quickly. I think England is probably a bit further ahead with those long COVID pathways. And I'm sorry we're not in Scotland or Northern Ireland at the moment. But so we've had a number of rethinks as we've gone along. But I would say that a lot of it comes back to actually trusting in the authenticity of what you're doing. And, if it gets a bit messy at times, well, we're still actually exploring and doing work in this space that we hope will be really helpful and inform the support that people need.
Yeah, and this ability to adapt is so important as well, isn't it? I mean, I've learned that myself from living with this, that you have no idea how you're going to feel day to day until you wake up that morning. And even how you wake up that morning isn't always a guide of how you're going to feel later on that day. So it's this ability to sort of adapt and just kind of go with the flow, which is quite difficult sometimes, isn't it?
I must admit, I know this is going to sound a bit perverse, but I do quite like the sort of messiness of not quite knowing what it's going to be like. I don't know why, but my colleague likes things much more organised and structured, but I think that's why we work together quite well. But the other thing, Jack, is that we have a group of 7 people in all with long COVID that are our public and patient involvement group. And often what they're doing is helping me to feel more confident about what we're doing. I mean, we had a meeting, our last meeting, we were saying, is it going to be like a party where you worry that not enough people are going to come, and then you worry that you're going to have too many? And that's what I was sort of thinking about. I was vacillating from one to the other the whole time, thinking, I'm going to have too many, we're not going to have enough. And all 7 of them said, Fiona, you really, really don't need to worry. What you're doing is right. It's just about getting the message out to people that they can access, they can self-refer. So, I mean, I know that we're going to talk about how people could, put themselves forward to take part in this research. They were sort of telling me it will happen. And I think also drawing on all of their experiences has been such a comfort to me, and I know my other colleague, I work very closely with another woman called Fiona, or Fee, and we work very closely. We're based at St George's together, and I know that we get a great deal all the time, inspiration, ideas, creativity from all those people with long COVID that we've got to know so well.
We'll be right back. I'm interrupting myself for a second to tell you about long COVID breathing. The fabulous Fiona Jones and I have teamed up to bring you long COVID breathing. We are both passionate about sharing our expertise and experience of the breath and how incredibly helpful that can be with long COVID. We've worked together to develop a course that is specifically tailored to those with long COVID. It's a 6-week course with 12 sessions, all delivered online. The community feel and learning that we're all sharing is such a joy. To find out more information and to sign up for our courses, workshops and other shorter sessions, please check out the link below, longcovidbreathing.com, or email longcovidbreathing@gmail.com to start your breathing journey with us. Yeah, that's really lovely. And this idea of working with people with the condition, I mean, obviously we're talking long COVID here, but in all other sorts of research, you've got to involve the people who you're trying to do the research for, haven't you? Because who could know the condition better than the people living with it?
Yeah, and I feel quite strongly that, some of the work that goes on in healthcare research has a sort of tokenistic approach to involving people. So it's like, well, you've got your idea, but you just want to test it out with a few people. And we really did start, although we took the principles of Bridges, which is an approach to personalised support that people use in healthcare, we took those principles, but we only used it as really a starting point, as to, we're not starting necessarily with a complete blank slate, because we do know some aspects that we think could help. But actually, before I even submitted the grant, and I know you're based in Scotland, I did talk to many people, including some people in Scotland living with long COVID, and I just listened to their story. And it was a sort of snowball effect, Jack, in that one person said, well, I also know somebody else, and I also know somebody else. And I just sort of spent my time sort of immersed in hearing their stories, because, what people told us was how much they felt they still are completely floundering and not being believed, and they were dealing with the double whammy of the symptoms and everything else that goes on around them. And those sorts of things, I listened to lots of webinars, listened to people talking about it to try and sort of immerse myself in what it sounded like, to me as somebody not going through it, and how I could really sort of represent and use those experiences in an authentic way as I could.
Yeah, and really using the patients from really early on as well, like you said. There was someone that I spoke to, and they were talking about how if you involve your patients too late on, it's like turning a ship. You can't turn a ship that's already moving. Whereas you really need to get people involved early on, because then they can really help to shape what you're doing and make it much better as a result. And that sounds like what you guys have done.
Yeah, I would really agree with that. And I think, because I come from a healthcare background, I'm naturally also gravitated to people that were working in the public sector that got COVID, that then also ended up with long COVID symptoms. So, I was sort of putting myself in their shoes as well, working in schools or working in hospitals, in care homes. And I know that it's not only public sector workers that caught COVID, but they caught COVID at much higher rates than the rest of the population that was keeping themselves all safe at home, so didn't have the choice. So it did talk a lot about, and they were very, very candid about their experiences.
Yeah, that's really wonderful. And I think certainly from my own experience as well, speaking to somebody who's gone through this horrendous experience, it's quite validating for them to feel listened to as well.
Yeah.
When they've been ignored by their doctors or whatever, and then, to come to somebody who actually wants to hear their story. I think that's good.
Yeah. Because an example of that, if I may, is when we just put out a call to say, if you're interested in this project, get in touch. And we were inundated by people. But what we then realised was that actually we need people to support us with the co-design, but there are people that may want to wait and actually be on that expression of interest list to take part in the trial ultimately. But we then realised that they couldn't do both. So, if you take part in the co-design, then it actually excluded you from taking part in the trial. And so we then had to go back out to people and say, if you take part in the co-design, then it will then mean that you can't later on take part in the trial. And we still had many, many people that put themselves forward to take part in the co-design. And the reason why we decided that it would exclude people is because the co-design, which involved many sort of group meetings with other people with long COVID, almost became a sort of therapeutic space on its own. So because although I was involved in facilitating those sessions, the group sort of took on a bit of a life of its own, and they supported each other and they heard each other's story, and they said, this has happened to me, but this might help you. And so, in fact, we're doing an event, a couple of sessions next week to capture the impact of taking part in that co-design, because we felt that, and it's because that's what people have fed back, they felt it has been therapeutic for them to take part in that process, which is sometimes an unintended consequence, isn't it, of something that you do.
Yeah, then that's a lovely kind of silver lining of it, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it shows the power of support as well, I think, and being listened to, which a lot of people just don't feel like they have been. So yeah, that's really, really wonderful. So you've designed this intervention, is that right?
Yes, that's right.
Are you able to talk a little bit more about what's within that, or is that all a bit hush hush at the moment?
No. It's I think there's only so much you can keep hush hush about an intervention. So one of the aspects of this is a new resource, which I know maybe people listening to this podcast may be thinking, oh no, not another app, or not this or not that. So from our co-design, people categorically said they didn't want an app. And actually, what they wanted was to have a feeling, and this is where you get a much richer sort of picture of what's needed for people in co-design work, because they said they wanted that feeling of a community in their hand. They wanted, I put across to them that in a way the evidence base just come from what you learn from a clinical trial. It comes from the experience of people like yourself that are living with it. So this resource is a book, an old-fashioned book, but it's written together with people with long COVID, and it includes their stories, their strategies, their ideas, their creativity. And from beginning to end, it's been written together with these people that we had probably about 30 people that contributed, but probably about 18 altogether that actually were really involved in, we like that section here, we like this to be called that, we want this in here, and we wrote the content together. So there's a resource, but then there's also these one-to-one support sessions, and that's using the principles of, so whatever that person is sitting there in front of you with and experiencing, that's the start point for that person. When I explain it to clinicians, they say, well, we do work in that way already. All I would say is that our listen practitioners they ramp up that whole approach. So it's 100% about the narrative, the story, the experiences of that person. And then using their expertise together, they actually work out how to stabilize, how to learn about their triggers, how to build the strategies, so that ultimately they're looking at gaining more control every day. So the impact, we hope, will be on how people feel about their everyday life, their experiences, their activities. So in a way, I can't say exactly what it is, because our practitioners already, or clinicians, I tend to call them practitioners, but you know that that's a clinician. But our practitioners, they go with the direction of that person, but they are really highly skilled and trained.
Yeah, this sort of one-to-one follow the individual kind of, what's the word I'm looking for, process maybe.
Yeah.
I think that makes a difference, because we know every person is going to be different. Even two people who have quite similar symptoms, they might have completely different home lives, or they're all going to be very, very individual. So their sort of treatment or care plan is going to be very, very different depending on all of the things. But I mean, one of the things that I found from the beginning was that, I felt ill. I wasn't supposed to feel ill because, I was supposed to have brushed this off because that's what I was told. And then I didn't get better and I didn't know what to do. And I'm an answers person. I love answers. I want to find answers because then I know what I can do. And it took me a long time before I could kind of actually find something practical. But, I can actually try to do that and that will help me. And once I started doing that, things did start to improve a little. But it took me a long time to find that. And hopefully with an intervention such as this, it can help guide people in the right direction as well, rather than somebody having to use all of their very limited energy scouring Google and doing their own research, because some people aren't able to do that either.
Yeah, and I think coming back to the training, so part of the co-design was not just designing the new book, the intervention, but also designing the training for practitioners. So they have all had 8 hours of training, but that training has been co-delivered with people with long COVID. And it follows a sort of path in terms of, so they really understand what the core principles, there are 8 core principles of the listen intervention. And they then think about the language and the strategies that they use around those core principles. But what we also want to do is to recognise that if you're somebody with long COVID and you get then seen by a long COVID service, although you may be provided with rehabilitation and screening and all of those sorts of services, the listen intervention is very much, it's not fitting the structure of the service, it's actually focusing on you right from the start. And so for the practitioners, they had to sort of peel away their sort of tendency to want to fix and sort and jump in and give answers straight away, which I'm not saying all practitioners work in that way, they don't. But when you work in a healthcare pathway, by nature of a pathway, people have to sort of move through, and it can be quite sort of formulaic in terms of that pathway. I have to say the work done in the long COVID space has been off the scale in terms of, in England, in some areas, they have really been very innovative and quite quick off the mark, which goes back to that original thorny issue of like usual care looks very different in different places as well. But I see part of this intervention as being about the power of the skills of that practitioner and not underestimating how powerful that can be to provide a safe and therapeutic space. It's not a psychologically driven intervention, because I know people think, oh, is this talking therapies? It very much comes from a sort of rehab basis, but it's absolutely about the personal story of that. The practitioner has to sort of stop themselves just as part of this intervention. They haven't got their tick sheet of questions to answer, to ask, and there's no sort of formula. And that in itself does seem a little bit nerve-wracking for the practitioners. So, but we have 52 practitioners trained now, and we are a sort of a community now. So we're working with that community. So the quality of what they provide tries to stay as really as high as possible.
Yeah, really listening to the individual. I think that's important. And with a 5-minute, 10-minute GP consultation, you barely have time to get in the door. And that's not the fault of the GPs.
No.
Because, they've got to fit in so many patients. But being heard, as an individual, that's important.
Yeah.
You're talking about the training of the practitioners or clinicians. And I think this again, it's really important because GPs, for example, there's a lot of people that are very happy to sit and bash GPs, and I think actually they've got an impossible job.
Oh, completely.
They're trying to deal with all of these things that actually, they're not specialists. That's not their job. And yet, certainly in Scotland, it's like, oh, you have to go to your GP, and the GPs will know what to do. And the GPs are like, whoa, I don't know what to do here. So the training of the clinicians, they need to be taught about the condition and all of these things that GPs, for example, just they can't know the specifics of. So that's big, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. And I think it's the same. So we have allied health professionals, so physiotherapists, occupational therapists. We also have nurses. We also have assistant psychologists, all part of this group of practitioners. But in a way, what's nice about this, it doesn't matter what profession you come from. We call them our listen practitioners because they have become skilled and expert in this area. But the more that, because I think if we have as our start point that we know quite a lot about some of the symptoms that people have, we know that there's drug trials, we know that there's things that can help. We don't have one answer to this, to long COVID. So what we're looking for, I say to people, you've got to be a bit like a detective and really try to help somebody to piece together what might be the right approach for them. And when I listen to my colleagues that are doing a lot of work around the whole notion of safe rehabilitation, it very much fits with that sort of movement around this isn't just about you've got to build yourself up again slowly, do your exercises, build up bit by bit. Because although we don't know 100% what works, we know what doesn't work. And what doesn't work is that sense of, you've got to push yourself on, you've got to try and set yourself goals, you've got to make sure you build up incrementally. And I've learned all of that in spades through this co-design, but also this is the research that's emerging that's very, very powerful around this area.
Yeah, yes, exactly. And it comes back to, viewing each person as an individual person rather than a statistic or a number or someone to move through a pathway and to sort of clear off your desk kind of thing.
Yeah. And just to say, Jackie, that the book that I mentioned, it embodies the whole approach. So the practitioners have had to learn this book cover to cover because we say to them the answers are in there, because these have come about through us collating information from people that are living with it and have built up a body of evidence themselves about what has worked. So I think when I say a book, I feel as if it does it a disservice in some ways, because it's much more as people described it, it's like a community in your hand of support.
Is this book available kind of generally, or is it just through the intervention at the moment?
Just the intervention, but everybody that takes part in the trial, even if they are unfortunately randomised, I say unfortunately, I shouldn't say that, but if they are randomised to the usual care, carrying on the usual care, they will get a copy of the book once they've done their 3-month measures. So they will get that from us. But I guess the other thing to say about taking part in research is it's about one of the most valuable things you could do to try and inform how we support this growing number. I was just catching up on some of the statistics around long COVID, the prevalence of long COVID in the UK alone, and it's frightening, isn't it, in terms of the numbers. And we know that the incidence is lower with the Omicron variant, but because of the increased number of people that actually got Omicron, then it doesn't make any difference. There's still going to be 2 million people living with long COVID symptoms.
But yeah, it is. It's frightening, isn't it? And this living with COVID thing, it's going to keep going up, isn't it? If people are going to keep getting infected, then the numbers of long COVID are going to keep rising. So it's it really is something that we need to kind of get on, like yesterday.
Yeah, and I'm really, really so grateful for anybody that actually refers themselves to take part in this research, because this research, in the majority of areas where we have the trial sites up and running, people can self-refer. There's some inclusion-exclusion criteria, but you can self-refer. But we talked about ethics before we started, and that was one of the things that the ethics committee really applauded us for, was actually to, if you've seen your GP and, you've seen someone, then you can self-refer and just expression of interest. And the way to express interest is through that listen trial link that's hosted by Cardiff University, which I know you'll put on as a link at some point, Jackie. But just have a look and see what you think about it.
Yeah, that's great. I'd love to talk more about recruitment, but maybe first, could we maybe talk a little bit more about, say, somebody did get recruited or recruited themselves or referred themselves? Or what would the next phase of the study look like for them?
Yeah, so there's a website where you can just do an expression of interest, but you can also just request a phone call back. So it doesn't have to be everything online. You can just request a phone call back. And then there are information sheets. There is a film that you can, like an audio that you can access that is people with long COVID that took part in this sort of initial work, talking about the project and saying how you can take part. Once you've sort of thought about it, then there will be a sort of initial lot of screening questions. It's extremely broad because we wanted to cast our net wide. And then, now, this is the bit that people need to have a bit of tenacity for. There are some questions to answer at baseline before the randomisation happens. But the good thing about the Cardiff team is that they're very happy for people to do that in sections. They don't need to do all the questions in one go. And also they can do the questions with people over the phone if necessary, not just having to do it all online. Because we're very aware, we've cut it down as much as we possibly can. But as with any research, and I'm sure when you've spoken to other researchers, they've said the same, the burden of questions for people is a problem often. And once you've been randomised and you get told you're either part of the intervention or you're on usual care pathway, there are 2 more sets of measures that will be taken, a sort of interim set of measures, and then at 3 months as well. And but the intervention, you will just get allocated a slot, or you will say if you can do some slots, some intervention slots. One of the things just to say is that if you live in Wales, you can basically self-refer from anywhere in Wales because there's a sort of central group of practitioners. But in England, it has to relate to where the trial sites are. So we haven't got this sort of core group of practitioners in England that can take people from everywhere. We'd love that. And we have thought about how we could do that. But at the moment, we've got trial sites in the Midlands, in Yorkshire, in London, in Essex, but not everywhere. So that's the downside, is that it's best to go onto the website to look at where the trial sites are because they're not everywhere, unfortunately.
Sure. And I'll pop a link to that in the show notes so people can hit that and go and have a look. So somebody gets recruited and they go through all the questions and things, and they make it that far, and then they get either onto the intervention or not. And did you say 3 months it runs for?
Yeah. So once you've sort of come out the other side at 3 months, if you've done the intervention, hopefully you are feeling better. We really hope you're feeling better and a bit more in control. But after 3 months, you can then do any other form of rehabilitation or anything at all. So what this can be quite attractive to is if you're in an area where there's a very long waiting list for something to get seen by somebody, then you can actually self-refer onto the trial in advance. Or equally, and our trial sites know this as well, and actually they were there's only one area that aren't so happy about the self-referral. That's just one trial site. But in every other area, they're very happy for people to be self-referred while they're waiting for other treatments, because it's a window of 3 months to do the listen intervention and to do the questions and everything. And equally, the same goes for people, if you've had rehab and you still have symptoms, then you can refer yourself to the listen trial as well. So, again, we just wanted to make it as easy and open for people to be able to. Having said that, the issue for me is the fact that we haven't got trial sites open in every area in England, but it is what it is. And, we're still confident that we're going to hopefully be able to recruit from those regions in England, ultimately for them to hit their recruitment targets as well.
We'll be right back. Hey there, I'm just jumping in for a second to see if you're enjoying this episode. If you're finding it useful, maybe you would consider sharing it somewhere, a friend, a group, or even on your Twitter feed. If everyone was able to share just once, we'd be able to get this information out to even more people who really, really need it. so please consider sharing somewhere if you possibly can. I hope you enjoy the episode, and thank you so much. I mean, that's great that it's open to such a wide variety of people, kind of wherever they are in their journey, I guess.
Exactly, exactly. And I think so, as long as you've had symptoms for more than 12 weeks, and if you are sort of 13 weeks after having your episode of COVID, then you absolutely can refer yourself. And equally, if you are, as many people are coming through still, actually first contracted COVID in March 2020, or even before, as we know. Somebody in our co-design group said that he felt he was sort of the first person to get COVID. He was like sitting next to somebody from Wuhan in December, and he caught symptoms afterwards. So he was convinced that he got it then. But, as we well know, it was certainly circulating around a lot earlier.
Yeah. And there's a lot of studies that are excluding people that don't have a positive test. Where do you guys sit on that one?
No, we don't exclude people that don't have a positive test because of those people in the early stages that couldn't get a positive test. So it's more about the symptoms, and we know that there could be 205 symptoms at the moment, or it certainly was last time I looked. It's probably more than that now across 10 body systems. So no, you don't have to have a positive test.
Yeah, and that's definitely a source of frustration among a lot of people that I've spoken to who were ill early on. They have the most data because they've been ill for the most time, and yet they can't actually get involved in quite a lot of different studies because they don't have that positive test. So that's really great to hear. So yeah, you said the intervention will run for the 3 months, assuming it'll take a bit more than 3 months to get results.
Yeah, definitely. So the intervention itself is sort of says 6 sessions. So it's 6 of these sort of one-to-one support sessions. And the final measure is at 3 months. Because we started in August 21, with a lot of the studies that were funded by NIHR at the time, they were all the non-hospitalised, orphan people were non-hospitalised after COVID, people who lived with long COVID. Because of the nature of this work, a lot of us are under a lot of pressure to get this project through and our results out much, much quicker. So we are due to be a 2-year project, which means we will be looking at autumn 2023. We would have, but we will, I'm sure there will be some sort of interim, we'll gradually start to sort of share some of the key aspects of this work a little bit more. But we're really looking at autumn 2023 for the final results to be ready, which is a year from now.
A year from now, isn't it? Yeah. I was just trying to do the which year are we in now thing.
Oh, I'm so glad I even remembered it. We started in 2021.
So yeah, of course, because if you're running a 3-month intervention on 500 people or something, you can't necessarily do all those 500 people at the same time, can you?
That's right.
Not with 50 clinicians.
That's right. Each area has a target, usually of about 30 people that they're recruiting locally. And I have to say, Wales is winning hands down at the moment. They did an amazing publicity drive, and we've got many people now expressed interest and are consented and on that pathway, so which is really great.
Yeah, that's awesome. And you're still looking for more?
Yes, we want more. We've got sites that are nearly ready to open as well. So there's a big sort of lot of sites in Oxfordshire and Essex that are due to open. They're very close, and Sheffield as well is really close. But we've already got sites in Wigan, Coventry, South Warwickshire, all of Wales, as I said, and areas of southwest London. So those are the main sites at the moment that we've got open. But, that Oxfordshire area is going to be really well covered, Essex, Sheffield. A lot of the sort of, Coventry and Warwickshire area is covered really well as well.
Great. So anyone who lives in those sort of areas, go look at the website.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, fantastic. I mean, obviously this is a bit location I was going to say location limited. I'm not sure if that's entirely fair, but you've got to be in one of the locations where you've got a site in order to take part.
Yeah, unfortunately, yes. I mean, but what I would say to people is that literally as soon as we get the results, so alongside this project, we are doing a really in-depth, what's called process evaluation, so that by the time we get to October, we hopefully, October 23, we'll know exactly what this package of support needs to look like for people, around the UK. And we will submit those findings. We will involve NHS England, Department of Health in all of this work to then inform what we hope will be something that could be successfully spread into other areas.
Yeah, I mean that was my next question. What happens next? And obviously, if even if it was an area that didn't have a clinical trial site,
Yeah,
the intervention will hopefully be rolled out much more widely.
absolutely. And people that took part in the co-design, many of them don't live in the trial sites. And so some of them were saying, "Oh, it's such a shame. Oh, I could really do with this in my area," But that's why actually helping with research is such an altruistic thing. It really, really is. People giving the gift of their time, their expertise is really, really important. And that co-design group, I will be always so grateful to them. But anybody that puts themselves forward for this trial will be helping us understand about this support that people that will hopefully be there for people.
Yeah, and I think it goes both ways as well. Obviously, you need people to be involved, otherwise the research doesn't work, does it?
Absolutely.
But the people who are involved, it's going to help them as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
I mean, I find a sense of purpose is quite important when you're not working, but benefiting from the intervention as well, you would hope.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Is this something that, once you get your results sort of next year, that could be certainly used to inform other countries, other areas? For example, I mean, I'm in Scotland, and Scotland Health has evolved, and I think the same in Northern Ireland, isn't it? But might your results be useful to other places as well?
Yeah, I mean, it was one of the reasons why I was really delighted to be asked to take part in that panel at the long COVID physio, the international forum that was hosted in North America, and is that there is so much shared experience. And I just hope to, I think with any sort of project like this, you need to understand your route to impact right at the beginning. So we have this sort of, if you like, our route to impact is what ideally we get to the end, and we then share, and we have a ready-made training package for healthcare teams. We have resources ready to go. It can either be integrated into what's already there, or it can be used as the main intervention. That's what we're hoping for. We've already started a collaboration in Canada with a project that's they want to use the basis of Listen to inform an application in their area. They're going to do the co-design work. It's a grant application, so we don't know whether it will be funded, but that's the sort of thing that can happen. It's that people can take, maybe the co-design, the way we've done the co-design, and take that and adapt it. Yeah, so that's my wish as well, because otherwise, we have to ask ourselves about the value for money for research, that, you need to be sort of be able to fast forward and get this route to impact speeded up as much as possible. If it's something that's going to work, then it needs to be out there and being used.
Yeah, exactly. And the sharing, the learning, and the crossovers and everything, there's
Yeah.
a lot of stuff out there now, isn't there? So it would be really, really great if people could, really share that and listen to each other.
Yeah, could I just say thank you to people that have helped us and be more informed about this area. So Margaret O'Hara, who founded the long COVID support group, was, I hope she won't mind me saying, but she asked me some very tough questions when I first met with her, and helped sort of shape the thinking about our PPI even more than we're doing, than we'd originally planned. And so I found that incredibly valuable, but also, just the group of people with long COVID, those people that took part in the co-design, there's 30 people, but also the people that I just got on the phone to and gave their time when I was preparing for the presentation so that I could get to try to understand. So just like to thank them. And then the whole Cardiff University team are absolutely awesome in terms of managing this clinical trial. And then my colleague Fee and Nero and Nick and Jess that are all part of the, who else have I forgotten about? Bernie, who are all part of the Listen project management group. They're amazing.
Yeah, because it really is a team effort, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
Fantastic. Well, let's hope we manage to get you a few more participants.
Thank you, Jackie.
I'll definitely stick that link in. Yeah, well, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been so interesting hearing about all of this, and maybe you can come back and talk to me when you get your results.
I would love to. I would really love to. Thank you very much for asking me.
Thank you so much for your time, and yeah, all the best with the study. Thank you so much to all of my guests, and to you for listening. I hope you've enjoyed it, or at least found it useful. The Long COVID podcast is entirely self-produced and self-funded. I'm doing all of this myself. If you're able to, please go to buymeacoffee.com/longcovidpod to help me cover the costs of hosting the podcast. Please look out for the next episode of the Long COVID podcast. It's available on all the usual podcast hosting things. And do get in touch